The obsidian walls of the High Synod were not merely built. They were grown from the calcified despair of 1,000 conquered worlds, polished to a mirror sheen that reflected the endless, terrifying precision of the Vexian hegemony. In this colossal chamber, suspended in the gravity-less heart of the capital station, the silence was heavier than the hull of a dreadnought. It was a silence born not of peace, but of total, suffocating dominance. The air recycled through filtration systems that smelled faintly of ozone and crushed violets, a scent engineered to induce compliance in the lesser species. But here, among the high exarchs, it merely served as a reminder of their sterility. Light did not flood the room. It bled reluctantly from bioluminescent veins in the floor, casting long, skeletal shadows that danced across the faces of the ruling council. There were no chairs, for the Vexia did not sit. They hovered, suspended by magnetic harnesses, their elongated, pale limbs trailing beneath them like the tentacles of deep-sea leviathans. They were the architects of the grand design, the species that had systematized the galaxy, organizing chaos into a grid of production, assimilation, and order. High Exarch Calith drifted to the center of the intake circle, his eyes, 4 orbs of shifting nebulous gas, narrowing as he surveyed the tactical display projected in the center of the room. The display was a hologram of such complexity it would have driven a primitive mind to madness, showing the swirling arms of the galaxy, painted in the crimson of Vexian territory. It was a map of absolute victory. Entire star systems were reduced to data points of resource extraction. Civilizations were categorized by their utility. Rebellions were mathematical errors already corrected by the algorithmic cruelty of the hegemony's fleets. Yet amidst this sea of red, there was a single, pulsing point of static. It was not a fleet. It was not a star fortress. It was a mote of dust in the eye of a god. Calith's voice, when it came, vibrated through the fluid-filled sacks on the necks of his peers, a sound like grinding tectonic plates. "Explain," he commanded, the word echoing into the vast vaulted ceiling, swallowed by the darkness. "The expansion fleet has halted. The timeline of assimilation is delayed by 3 standard cycles. The logic engines predict a probability of resistance at 0.0, yet the fleet does not move." Sub-Overseer Vrain, a younger Vexian whose skin still held the iridescent sheen of a recent molt, trembled slightly in his harness. To deliver bad news to Calith was usually a death sentence, executed with bureaucratic efficiency. Vrain manipulated the holographic interface with trembling, spindly fingers, zooming in on the static point. The image resolved not into a terrifying armada, nor a cosmic anomaly, but into a singular, geometric shape. It was brutish, angular, and devoid of the elegant curves that defined Vexian engineering. It looked like a brick thrown through a glass window, a harsh, unpainted block of gray metal, scarred by micrometeors and radiation, drifting in the void between the binary stars of the Kelly's Gate. "It is a vessel, High Exarch," Vrain whispered, his vocal synthesizers clicking with nervousness. "A single vessel of unknown configuration. It sits directly in the hyperspace tier line. The Grand Armada cannot engage the hyperdrives without colliding with its mass shadow. It is sitting there." A ripple of confusion moved through the High Synod. The idea was absurd. The Grand Armada was a force of nature, a procession of warships so vast that their combined exhaust plumes could ignite nebulas. They had crushed the crystalline cities of the psionics of Rill in an afternoon. They had dismantled the hive minds of the Grot within a week. And now, a single ship was halting their advance. Calith drifted closer to the projection, his gaseous eyes swirling with a mixture of contempt and curiosity. "Scan analysis," he demanded. "Is it a derelict, a precursor relic? Why has it not been vaporized?" Vrain hesitated, glancing at the data streams cascading down his retinal display. "It is not a derelict, Exarch. It is active. We have hailed it. We have threatened it. We have fired warning salvos across its bow, enough plasma to boil an ocean. The ship, it does not move. It does not raise shields. It simply absorbs the energy and vents it as heat. And the scans. The scans make no sense." "Elaborate," Calith hissed, his patience fraying like a worn tether. Vrain swallowed hard. "The density readings are impossible. That ship, though small compared to our flagship, contains the mass of a neutron star compressed into a fabricated hull. It is not just a ship, Exarch. It is a gravity well. If we fire our main cannons, the gravitational backlash could tear the fleet apart. And there is one life form aboard." The silence in the chamber deepened, becoming a physical weight. One life form. He concept was alien to the Vexia, who existed in bonded triads, who moved in swarms, who understood that strength lay in numbers and unity. Solitude was a disease. To be alone was to be broken. "One," Calith repeated, the word tasting of ash. A suicide pilot? A fanatic? We do not know, Vrain admitted. But we have received a transmission. It is audio only, analog, primitive. It loops on a single frequency. Calith gestured a command, and the audio filled the chamber. It was not a scream nor a war cry. It was a voice, low and textured, filled with the rasp of biological fatigue, accompanied by the faint hum of machinery and the slow, rhythmic intake of breath. The voice spoke a language the universal translators struggled to parse, filtering it through layers of archaic syntax before settling on a rough interpretation. This is the United Earthship Silent Forge. You are in a restricted zone. Turn back. This is your only warning. We are not here to fight, but we will not move. The message clicked off, then repeated. This is the United Earthship Silent Forge. Calith stared at the ugly gray block on the hologram. The arrogance of it was suffocating. A single biological entity in a ship that looked like industrial refuse commanding the masters of the galaxy to turn back. It was an insult to the grand design. It was a chaotic variable that needed to be excised. Prepare my personal shuttle, Calith ordered, his decision freezing the room. And summon the first speaker of the warcast. I wish to see this silent forge with my own eyes. I wish to look upon the creature that believes it can halt the tide of history. The journey to the Kelly's Gate was a blur of blue-shifted starlight, the Vexian shuttle cutting through the fabric of space with elegant ease. As they reverted to real space, the magnitude of the standoff became visually apparent. The Grand Armada was a wall of gold and white ceramic, a tapestry of lethal beauty that stretched across the star system, blotting out the light of the binary suns. Thousands of interceptors swarmed like angry wasps, heavy cruisers loomed like floating cathedrals, and in the center, the flagship, the Ascendant Glory, was a moon-sized sphere of perfect destruction. And there, floating in the precise center of the fleet's firing vector, was the human ship. Calith viewed it through the viewport of his shuttle. It was even uglier in person. It lacked the smooth, organic curves of advanced technology. It was all hard angles, exposed piping, and thick, slab-sided armor plates that looked as though they had been hammered out on an anvil by a blind smith. It rotated slowly, lazily, indifferent to the thousands of weapons locked onto its hull. The sensors screamed with the gravitational anomaly the vessel generated. It was as if the ship was not merely floating in space, but was pinned to the fabric of the universe by a nail of incredible weight. Hail them again, Calith commanded his pilot, his voice dripping with icy disdain. Connect me directly. The screen flickered, static washing over the pristine Vexian interface before resolving into an image. The bridge of the silent forge was dark, lit only by the amber glow of physical monitors, not holograms but glass screens. The air inside looked thick, hazy with recycled oxygen and something else, something primitive. Sitting in a command chair that looked more like a throne of worn leather and steel was the creature. It was bipedal, soft-skinned, lacking the protective chitin or the elegant elongation of the Vexia. It wore a heavy suit of fabric and polymers, the helmet resting on a console beside it. The creature had hair on its face, a sign of poor evolution, and its eyes were dark, set deep in sockets shadowed by exhaustion. It held a mug of steaming liquid in one hand, bringing it to its lips with a slow, deliberate movement. I am High Exarch Calith of the Vexian Hegemony, ruler of the 12 sectors, architect of the grand design, Calith announced, his translation software broadcasting his magnificence. You stand before the might of a galaxy united in purpose. You are a glitch in the system. Identify yourself and surrender or be deleted. The human paused, lowering the mug. He looked at the camera, not with fear, not with awe, but with a profound, crushing boredom. He blinked slowly. I'm Captain Vance, the human said. His voice was the same as the recording, gravel and dust. And like I said, Exarch, you need to turn around. You're clogging up the lane. You are one ship, Calith scoffed, the concept offending his logical core. Against the infinite, do you possess a weapon that can kill 1,000,000 souls? Do you have shields that can withstand the heat of a star? Your vessel is primitive, your biology is soft. Why do you persist in this error? Vance sighed, a sound that crackled over the speakers. He leaned forward, the leather of his chair creaking. We aren't fighting you, Calith, if we... Ting, you'd know, we're waiting. Look, my shift is almost over, and I really don't want to file the paperwork for an interspecies incident. Just go back the way you came. Find another route. This sector is closed. Closed? Calith's nebulous eyes flared red. The hegemony does not recognize boundaries. We are the inevitable future. There is no close to us. He turned to his pilot. Signal the Ascendant Glory, fire the subjugation beam, low power, cripple their engines. Let us drag this debris out of our path and dissect the creature. The pilot hesitated, sensing the density of the human ship again, but obeyed. Outside, the massive flagship's forward prongs began to glow with blinding white energy. A beam of pure ionic disruption, capable of shutting down the power grids of a planetary continent, lashed out across the void. It struck the silent forge squarely amidships. Calith watched, expecting the gray brick to drift lifelessly, its lights extinguishing. Instead, the beam hit the human hull and splashed. It was like watching water hit a red-hot skillet. The energy did not penetrate, it cascaded around the ship's geometric angles, flowing into vents that glowed briefly cherry red before fading. The silent forge did not shudder. It did not move a millimeter. The energy dissipated, and the ship remained, dark and silent as a tombstone. On the screen, Vance hadn't even spilled his coffee. He glanced at a monitor to his left, tapped a physical button, and looked back at Calith. "That was rude," Vance said, his voice dropping an octave, losing the boredom and gaining a sudden, terrifying gravity. "And it was a mistake." "Impossible," Calith whispered, checking the sensor logs. The energy output had been sufficient to overload a Class 4 shield generator. The human ship had simply eaten it, absorbed it into its thermal reserves. "What are you?" Calith demanded, his arrogance beginning to fracture, revealing the cold fear beneath. "That technology, it is not possible for a species of your apparent level." Vance set the mug down. He stood up. For the first time, Calith saw the sheer size of the human. He was dense, his movements heavy but precise. "You guys expanded fast," Vance said, walking toward the camera, his face filling the screen. "You conquered the Rodin, the Krell, the Vrak. You looked at the stars and saw resources. You saw a map to be colored in. We looked at the stars and saw the dark." Vance leaned in, his eyes hard and flinty. "You think you're the apex predators because you have the biggest fleet. You think numbers mean safety. But you've never left the cradle, Calith. You've been playing in the shallow end of the pool." "We have conquered half the galaxy," Calith shrieked, slamming his hand on the console. "Yeah," Vance said softly. "The safe half, the quiet half. You're trying to cross the Kelly's gate. Do you know why this sector was empty when you found it? Do you know why no signals come from the Orion arm anymore?" The question hung in the air, chilling the fluid in Calith's spine. The Vexian history archives were silent on the Orion arm. It was simply listed as null space. "It is irrelevant," Calith insisted, though his voice wavered. "We will expand. We will adapt." "No," Vance said. "You won't, because what's behind me isn't resources, it's a hunger, and we've been holding the door shut for 10,000 years. The transmission cut. Calith stared at the blank screen. The silence in the shuttle was absolute. Then the sensor officer screamed. "Exarch energy spike, the human ship, it is unfolding." Outside, the silent forge began to change. The gray slabs of armor shifted, sliding over one another with the groan of tormented metal. The ship didn't grow larger, but it became more complex, exposing inner mechanisms that defied Euclidean geometry. Strange, dark energy crackled between the plates, not the bright plasma of the Vexia, but a black, oily lightning that seemed to drink the light of the stars. From the bow of the ship, a spire emerged, pointing not at the fleet, but at the empty void behind the human vessel, the direction the Vexia wanted to go. "They are powering a weapon," the pilot cried. "Targeting nothing, they are targeting empty space." "Wait," Calith whispered, a sudden, horrifying realization dawning on him. "They are not targeting space, they are targeting the structure of space." A beam of darkness erupted from the human ship. It didn't shoot outward, it shot inward, tearing a hole in reality. But instead of a hyperspace window, what opened was a window into a nightmare. Through the tear, Calith saw something that made his rational mind recoil. It was a writhing, chaotic mass of biological impossibilities, a swarm of shadow and teeth that spanned light years. It was a universe of consumption, pressing against the glass of reality, scratching to get in. The Vexian fleet, for all its glory, looked like a collection of toys against the backdrop of Tha. Ancient, hungry, dark. The silent forge wasn't a warship. It was a lock, and the beam was the key, momentarily turning just enough to let the Vexia see what lay beyond the gate. The tear sealed shut with a thunderclap that resonated through the vacuum, shaking the sensors of every ship in the fleet. The silent forge returned to its blocky, inert state. The channel reopened. Vance was back in his chair, looking tired. "That," Vance said, "is the scourge. They ate the first 3 civilizations we met. They don't want your resources, Calith. They want your entropy. They want the heat of your life." Calith was trembling. The logic of the grand design had no category for this. "And you fight that with one ship." "One ship here," Vance corrected. "One ship at every gate. The United Earth fleets aren't conquerors, Exarch. We're janitors, we're wardens. We spent the last 5 millennia building walls around the nightmares you didn't even know existed. We sacrificed our golden age, our expansion, our comfort to become the shield. We built ships so dense, so heavy with armor and reality anchors that we could plug the holes in the universe. The philosophy of it struck Calith like a physical blow. The Vexia believed power was the ability to impose one's will upon others. They believed in expansion, in the visible glory of the fleet. But these humans, they had chosen the opposite. They had chosen contraction, duty, and silence. They possessed technology that could manipulate the fundamental constants of reality, the gravity drives, the reality anchors, and they used it not to rule, but to serve. To stand alone in the dark, unthanked, unremembered, guarding the sleep of children who would never know their names. Why, Calith asked, his voice barely a whisper. Why save us? We would have destroyed you. We threatened you. We are your enemy. Vance looked at the screen, and for a moment the weary soldier disappeared, replaced by something ancient and profoundly sad. Because we were like you once, he said. We thought the galaxy was ours for the taking. We were loud. We were arrogant. And then we met the scourge. We survived barely. And we decided that no one else should have to face that alone. We don't save you because we like you, Calith. We save you because we are the only ones who can. The Vexian High Exarch looked out the viewport at the silent forge. It no longer looked ugly. It looked immutable. It looked like the bedrock of the universe. The sleek golden ships of the hegemony suddenly seemed fragile, like glass ornaments hanging in a storm. The silence of the human ship was not the silence of emptiness. It was the silence of a mountain. What do you require of us? Calith asked, the words marking the end of the Vexian Golden Age and the beginning of something else. Turn around, Vance repeated, picking up his coffee. Go back to your sectors, build your cities, write your poetry, but stay away from the gates. And maybe stop shooting the people you meet. You never know who might be keeping the monsters away. Calith nodded slowly. He signaled the fleet. The order was given. For the first time in history, the Grand Armada retreated. They did not retreat from a superior fleet. They retreated from a truth. The engines of 10,000 ships flared, turning away from the Kelly's gate, leaving the gray, scarred brick of the silent forge alone in the dark. As the Vexian shuttle pulled away, Calith looked back one last time. He saw the human ship drifting, a lonely sentinel against the infinite night. He realized then that the humans had conquered the galaxy in a way the Vexia never could. They hadn't conquered it by owning the land. They had conquered it by accepting the burden of its survival. They were the adults in a galaxy of children playing with fire. And in the silence of the High Synod, when Calith returned, the debates about efficiency and assimilation died away. The map of the galaxy was no longer a thing to be colored in red. It was a fragile garden, surrounded by a dark, cold ocean. And out there in the crushing depths, the humans were swimming with the sharks so the Vexia wouldn't have to. The shift in Vexian culture did not happen overnight, but the seed was planted deep within the collective psyche of the hegemony. The footage of the silent forge and the brief, terrifying glimpse of the scourge was classified at the highest levels, but secrets in a society of total information integration have a way of bleeding through. Rumors spread through the data webs, whispers of the Grey Guardians, the anchors of the void. The arrogance of the fleet captains began to temper. Diplomacy, once seen as a tool for the weak, became a study of interest. If there were threats out there that defied the logic of the gun, then perhaps the gun was not the only tool required. Years later, a Vexian diplomatic envoy, led by Calith himself, now an elder of the state, traveled to the coordinate. Ease Vance had provided. They did not bring weapons. They brought resources. They brought refined alloys, zero-point energy modules, and biological synthesizers. They approached the silent forge, which still sat there, silent and immovable. When Vance accepted the hail, his beard was grayer, his eyes a little more sunken, but the mug of coffee was the same. We didn't call for supply, Vance grunted, though his tone was less harsh than before. It is not supply, Calith said, bowing his head, a gesture the Vexia had never performed for another species. It is tribute. We have analyzed your hull composition from the sensor logs. We have developed a metamaterial that is 40% more resistant to entropic decay. We offer it to you to reinforce the gate. Vance stared at the manifest Calith transmitted. For a long time he said nothing. Then a slow, crooked smile appeared on his face. Well, he said, that might actually be useful. The portside plating has been giving me a headache for a decade. We also offer, Calith continued, his voice steady, ships. Not for combat, but for maintenance. We wish to learn. We wish to assist in the watch. Vance leaned back. You want to sit in the dark and watch nothing happen for 50 years, Caliph. It's boring, it's lonely. We have learned that loneliness is a price, Caliph replied, and we are willing to pay our share. The alliance that formed was not one of flags or anthems. It was a silent pact. The Vexia began to build their own Forge-class ships, ugly, blocky, dense vessels designed not for speed but for endurance. They joined the humans at the gates. They learned the mathematics of reality anchoring. They learned that the universe was not a prize to be won, but a home to be protected. And so the galaxy continued to spin. Civilizations rose and fell. Wars were fought over trivial patches of dirt. But at the edges of the map, where the starlight faded into the deep unknown, the gray ships of the humans and the silver-reinforced ships of the Vexia stood side by side. They were the silent giants, the unthanked gods, the keepers of the door. They conquered nothing. They owned nothing. But because of them, the galaxy survived. And in the end, that was the only victory that mattered. The nature of the Vexian evolution was profound. They moved from a species of aesthetic perfection to one of functional endurance. They began to understand the human concept of grit. The High Synod was renamed the Council of Stewardship. The vast fleets of conquest were retrofitted. The Ascendant Glory, once the symbol of terror, was stripped of its planet-cracking lasers and fitted with massive sensor arrays and reality stabilizers, renamed the Shield of Krell. It was sent to the Northern Expanse, another potential weak point in the cosmic fabric. But it was on the Silent Forge that the true heart of the new era beat. Captain Vance, eventually, grew too old for the chair. The transition of command was a ceremony attended by Caliph in person. There were no trumpets, no parades, just two old beings standing on a metal deck that smelled of oil and recycled air. "You did well," Caliph said, looking at the human who had once terrified him. "You held the line." "We held the line," Vance corrected, his voice raspy. He handed Caliph a data slate, the access codes to the Scourge containment protocols. "Don't let them in, Caliph. Whatever you do, don't let them in." "I shall be the stone," Caliph promised. "I shall be the wall." Vance nodded, satisfied. He boarded a shuttle back to Earth, a world he hadn't seen in 40 years, a paradise he had sacrificed his life to ensure remained a paradise. He died 3 months later, sitting on a porch overlooking an ocean, watching the sunset. He didn't die a hero to the masses, few knew his name. He died a hero to the stars themselves. Back at the Kelly's gate, Caliph took the chair on the bridge of the Silent Forge. It was uncomfortably soft for a Vexian, and the controls were clunky analog switches. But as he looked out at the swirling darkness of the tier, he felt a strange sense of peace. He understood now the human strength. It wasn't about imposing order on chaos. It was about enduring the chaos so that order could exist elsewhere. The sensors pinged, a fluctuation in the tier, a tentacle of shadow light-years long testing the strength of the lock. Caliph didn't panic. He didn't call for the fleet. He simply reached out with his long, spindly fingers and pressed the button Vance had shown him. The reality anchors hummed. The ship groaned, taking the weight of the universe onto its shoulders. The shadow recoiled, burned by the stability of the lock. "This is High Exarch Caliph of the United Stewardship," he whispered into the comms, his voice echoing Vance's old recording. "You are in a restricted zone. Turn back." The darkness hissed, a sound felt in the mind rather than heard, and retreated. Caliph settled back into the worn leather chair. He picked up the mug Vance had left behind, a ceramic cup with the chipped words "World's Best Dad" printed on it. He didn't drink from it, but he held it, a talisman of the species that had taught the gods how to be humble. The watch continued, the silence held, and out in the galaxy, children played in the sunlight, lovers whispered in the moonlight, and artists painted the stars, never knowing that the only reason the canvas existed was because a few stubborn souls were holding back the night. The epic of the conquest was over. The epic of the endurance had begun. It became a rite of passage for the new species joining the galactic community. Before they could take their seat on the council, they were sent to the gates. They were made to look into the abyss. They were shown the Scourge, and they were shown the ships. It broke their arrogance. It bound them together in a brotherhood of survival. The humans, once seen as unpredictable primitives, were now revered as the Elder Guardians. Earth was not a capital of an empire, but a monastery of war, training the men and women who would go out to the edge and never come back. And deep in the archives of the Vexia, a new philosophy was written, etched into the very core of their AI logic centers. It was a simple phrase, translated from the human captain's first transmission. Strength is not what you can destroy. Strength is what you can endure. The galaxy grew old. Stars flared and died. Nebulas dissipated. But the gates remained, and guarding them, eternal and unyielding, stood the ships, the silent forge, the eternal watch, the unbroken vow. They were the monuments to the day the universe changed, the day one ship stood strong, and in doing so, saved the soul of a civilization. As eons passed, the Scourge eventually stopped testing the locks. They realized that this galaxy was not prey. It was something harder, something indigestible. They moved on to softer realities, leaving the Milky Way as a fortress of stubborn light in a devouring dark. And if one were to drift close enough to the Kelly's Gate, even 1,000,000 years later, they might still catch a faint, looping signal preserved by the Vexia as a holy relic. A raspy voice, tired but defiant, echoing forever in the void. "We are not here to fight, but we will not move." The legend of the human spirit had become a physical constant of the universe, as immutable as gravity, as blinding as a supernova. They had conquered nothing, and they had saved everything. The echoes of that standoff permeated the cultural strata of the galaxy in ways that defied simple history. Art, previously focused on the symmetry of the Vexian ideal or the chaotic emotionalism of the younger races, shifted. Sculptures began to depict rugged, unpolished forms holding up delicate spheres. Music evolved from soaring orchestral triumphs to deep, resonant drones that mimicked the humming of the reality anchors. The aesthetic of the block, the heavy, utilitarian shape of the silent forge, became a symbol of supreme authority and safety. To build a home in the shape of a cube was to invoke protection. To wear gray, unadorned clothing was a sign of high status, indicating one who served the watch. But the most profound change was within humanity itself. They did not become the rulers they could have been. With the Vexian alliance, they had access to technology that could have made them gods. They could have terraformed planets in days, extended their lifespans to millennia, bent the wills of lesser species. But the exposure to the Scourge, the knowledge of what lay outside, had humbled them permanently. They became a species of introverts, of engineers and philosophers. They colonized slowly, carefully. Every human child was taught from birth that their existence was a precarious thing, bought by the sacrifice of the few. On Earth, the Academy of the Anchor became the most prestigious institution in the galaxy. It wasn't a military academy in the traditional sense. They didn't teach conquest or fleet maneuvers. They taught concentration. They taught the psychological fortitude required to stare into a dimension of pure madness for 6-month shifts without blinking. They taught the physics of reality welding. Vexian students attended too, their tall, slender forms moving awkwardly through the brutalist concrete halls of the academy, learning to think like humans, stubbornly, irrationally, hopefully. One such student was Xylos, a Vexian of the 40th generation since the contact. He was a prodigy of void physics, capable of calculating hyperlane trajectories in his head. But he was failing his psychology of endurance classes. He could not understand the human concept of spite. "Why?" Xylos asked his human instructor, an elderly woman named Commander Holloway who had lost an arm on the perimeter. "Why do you hold the line when there is no hope of winning? The Scourge is infinite. We are finite. Logically, we should retreat to the core, fortify a smaller area, and maximize survival time. Holding the outer rim is inefficient." Holloway looked at the young alien, her prosthetic arm whirring softly as she adjusted a hologram of a failing containment field. "Xylos, you think like a calculator," she said, tapping his chest where his primary hearts beat. "That's why you're failing. You think the goal is to win." "Is the goal not survival?" Xylos asked, his head tilting. "No," Holloway said. "The goal is to be a pain in the ass." Xylos blinked, his translator struggling with the idiom. "A pain in the posterior." "Exactly," Holloway grinned, a sharp, fierce expression. "The Scourge wants easy meals, they want fear, they want panic. When we stand there and we don't run and we don't shoot and we just say no, it confuses them, it breaks their momentum. We don't fight to win Xylos, we fight to deny them the satisfaction. We fight out of spite. We value our existence simply because something else wants to take it away. That is the human condition, and now it is the Vexian condition too." Xylos pondered this, spite as a fuel source. It was irrational, it was inefficient. But as he looked at the history files, at the image of the silent forge facing down a galaxy-spanning empire with a cup of coffee and a refusal to move, he began to understand. It wasn't about power. It was about autonomy. It was the ultimate declaration of self. I am here and you cannot move me. Xylos graduated with honors. He was assigned to the Silent Forge II, a massive station built around the original hull of Vance's ship, now a permanent fixture at the Kelly's Gate. He spent his life watching the tier. He saw the scourge press against the glass 3 times. Each time he felt the terror rising in his gorge, the biological imperative to flee. And each time he remembered Holloway, he remembered Vance, he remembered Spite, and he held the lock. The galaxy entered a golden twilight. It was a time of unprecedented peace, largely because the concept of war seemed petty in the face of the reality. Diplomatic disputes were settled by sending the quarreling leaders to the observation deck of a gate ship. After an hour of staring into the roiling, hungry chaos of the scourge space, arguments over trade, tariffs, and border boys tended to seem incredibly stupid. Unity was enforced not by law, but by perspective. Yet the universe is not static. 10,000 years after the contact, a new signal arrived. It did not come from the scourge, it came from behind the scourge. The sensors on the silent forge II picked it up first. It was a modulated neutrino burst, cutting through the scourge dimension like a lighthouse beam through fog. It was structured, it was mathematical, and it was desperate. The High Council convened, human, Vexian, and a dozen other species. They analyzed the signal. It was a distress call. "There is something else out there," the head researcher, a human named Aris, explained to the hushed chamber. "Beyond the scourge, another galaxy or a cluster of survivors. They are fighting the scourge from the other side, and they are losing." The implications were staggering. For millennia, the coalition had been the shield, thinking they were protecting the only life that mattered. Now they realized they were not just a wall, they were a dam, and on the other side, others were drowning. "We cannot help them," the Vexian High Elder argued, though his voice lacked the certainty of his ancestors. "To open the gate is to invite the scourge in. We are the anchor, we cannot become the bridge." "We have to," Aris said, his voice quiet but firm. "Because the signal contains data, they have found a way to kill it." The room erupted. Killing the scourge? It was like talking about killing gravity. It was impossible, but the data was there. A frequency, a reverse harmonic that could unravel the binding energy of the shadow creatures. But it required a delivery system. It required a fleet to carry the device into the heart of the scourge space and detonate it. It was a suicide mission, not for a ship but for a civilization. To launch the fleet, the gate had to be opened wide. The silent forge would have to drop the lock. The debate lasted for months. The fear was palpable. To drop the shield was to risk everything they had built for 10,000 years. But the alternative was to let the strangers die, and eventually the scourge would grow strong enough to break the lock anyway. In the end, it was the memory of Vance that decided it. The archives were played. "We save you because we are the only ones who can," the logic held. If there were others in the dark, humanity and their allies had a duty. The great fleet was assembled. It was not a fleet of conquest nor of defense. It was a fleet of deliverance. The Vexian shield of Krell took point, its hull reinforced with layers of neutronium. The human dreadnoughts, the Vance, the Holloway, the Spite, flanked it. Millions of souls, Lantiers all, prepared to cross the threshold. The day of the opening was broadcast to every world in the galaxy. Trillions of beings watched as the silent forge II powered down its reality anchors. The tier in space ripped open, a bleeding wound in the sky. The scourge howled, a psychic scream that made psychics across the sector weep blood. The shadows rushed forward, eager to devour the feast they had been denied for eons. And the fleet rammed them. It was a battle beyond comprehension. Ships firing weaponized reality shards into clouds of entropy. The Vexian ships, sleek and fast, danced through the chaos, drawing the fire of the shadow beasts. The human ships, heavy and brutal, smashed through the lines, taking punishment that would have vaporized planets, their hulls glowing white-hot but holding together through sheer, stubborn engineering. They pushed into the scourge dimension. They fought for every inch of non-space. They took losses that would have broken the old empires, but they didn't stop. They were the spear of the galaxy, thrust into the heart of the monster. Deep in the scourge space, they found the source of the signal, a remnant fleet of crystalline ships shattering under the assault. The coalition fleet formed a protective ring around them, a wall of metal and will. The shield of Krell deployed the harmonic device. The detonation was silent. It was a wave of anti-entropy, a reassertion of physical law in a realm of chaos. It washed over the scourge, untying their existence. The shadows dissolved, shrieking as they were forced to obey the laws of physics, crumbling into harmless radiation. The tier stabilized. The scourge was not gone, it was vast, infinite. But the local infestation, the swarm that had plagued 2 galaxies, was shattered. The survivors were pulled through the gate. When the smoke cleared, the silent Forge II re-engaged the anchors. The door was closed. The galaxy had changed again. They were no longer just the guardians. They were the saviors. The new species, the crystalline ones, told stories of a darkness that had consumed their universe and how they had prayed to the void for a miracle. They hadn't expected the miracle to look like a brick. The story ends not with a parade, but with a meeting. The crystalline leaders met with the human and Vexian council. They were ethereal, fragile beings of light and song. They looked at the scarred, ugly ships of their rescuers with horror and awe. "You are so heavy," the crystalline leader sang, the translation vibrating in the air. "Your souls are so heavy, how do you bear it?" The current captain of the Silent Forge, a human named Silas, looked at the Vexian elder beside him. They shared a look of understanding that transcended biology. "We don't bear it alone," Silas said, "and besides, someone has to be the rock." The HFY elements were fully realized. Humanity hadn't just defeated an alien empire, they had converted them. They hadn't just survived a war, they had redefined the purpose of power. They taught the galaxy that the highest form of strength was not to conquer, but to endure, to stand in the door and say, "Not today." And somewhere in the databanks of the Silent Forge, the file labeled Vance Log 01 continued to loop, a digital ghost smiling over a universe he had saved by simply refusing to move. The ultimate victory of the stubborn, the apotheosis of the wall. The cinematic camera pulls back, leaving the bridge, leaving the ship, leaving the galaxy. It drifts into the intergalactic void where the silence is absolute. But even there, in the cold nothingness, there is a sense of presence, a boundary, a line that says, "Here be humans, turn back." The universe, for all its terror, had learned to respect the brick. As the epic of the Great Rescue faded into history, becoming myth, the galaxy settled into a maturity that few civilizations ever reach. The concept of empire had become obsolete, replaced by the lattice, a networked structure of mutual support and specialized purpose. The Vexia were the architects, building megastructures to harvest stars efficiently. The crystalline refugees, now known as the Luminoth, were the philosophers and artists, weaving culture that spanned light years. And the humans remained the wardens. They didn't govern, they didn't legislate, they lived on the fringe. The Sol system had become a pilgrimage site, a museum world where the grass was green and the sky was blue, preserved exactly as it was in the days of Vance. But most humans didn't live there. They lived on the anchor stations. They lived on the fortress worlds bordering the void. It was a strange societal evolution. They had become a monastic species, dedicated to the concept of the shield. It was said that you could tell a human by their eyes. They had the 1,000-yard stare genetically imprinted. They looked through you, not at you, as if they were constantly scanning for a crack in the wall of reality. I were quiet, polite, and terrifyingly efficient. When a human walked into a room on a core world, the music stopped, not out of fear, but out of respect. It was like a wolf walking into a gathering of sheep, not a hunting wolf, but a shepherd dog, scarred and weary, smelling of the rain and the dark. One incident in the 12th millennium of the Alliance encapsulated this dynamic. A new species, the Crawl, had just achieved FTL. They were aggressive, insectoid, and expansionist, much like the Vexia of old. They hadn't encountered the Alliance yet. They had only found uncolonized worlds on the edge of the southern rim. They thought they were the kings of space. They attacked a remote outpost. It wasn't a military base. It was a listening post, manned by 3 humans and a Vexian technician. The Crawl fleet, consisting of 50 warships, descended on the station, demanding surrender. The senior human officer, Lieutenant Kovic, didn't power up weapons. The station didn't have weapons. He simply activated the distress beacon, a specific frequency known as the dinner bell. The Crawl warlord, a towering chitinous beast named Thraka, laughed at the lack of resistance. He boarded the station, his soldiers swarming the corridors. They found the 4 crew members playing cards in the mess hall. "You are weak," Thraka roared, smashing the table. "Where is your fleet? Where is your warrior caste?" Kovic looked up from his hand. He was small, balding, and looked like an accountant. "We aren't the warrior caste," he said mildly. "We're the alarm system." "Alarm for who?" Thraka sneered. "I have conquered this system. I claim it for the Crawl Imperium." Kovic checked his watch. "You've got about 3 minutes to unclaim it and leave, or you're going to have a really bad day." "Your empty threats amuse me," Thraka hissed. "I will execute you and then I will." The sensors on the Crawl flagship screamed. It wasn't a hyperspace window opening. It was a folding. Space didn't tear, it bent. A vessel appeared. It was small, roughly the size of a crawl destroyer, but it was jet black, absorbing all light. It didn't have engines. It moved by manipulating the Higgs field around it. It was a Vance-class interdictor, the 9th generation of the original design. The crawl fired. Hundreds of plasma torpedoes streaked toward the black ship. The ship didn't shield. It didn't dodge. The torpedoes hit the black hull and vanished, teleported. A split second later, the torpedoes reappeared, inside the crawl ships. It wasn't a battle. It was a magic trick. Within 10 seconds, 49 crawl ships were disabled, their engines surgically removed by their own ordnance. The flagship was left untouched. The black ship hailed the station. A voice, synthesized but undeniably human, cut through the crawl comms. "Station 4, this is the UES, no trespassing. We detected a pest infestation. Do you require fumigation?" Kavik looked at Thraka, who was frozen in shock, his mandibles twitching. "I think they're leaving," Kavik said to the comms. "Are you leaving?" Thraka looked at the debris of his fleet. He looked at the small human. He looked at the black nightmare outside. We are leaving," he stammered. "Good choice," Kavik said, returning to his cards. "Tell your friends the southern rim is closed." The crawl retreated and never expanded that way again. They joined the Alliance 3 centuries later, becoming excellent logistical coordinators. Thraka wrote a memoir titled The Day I Met the Wall, which became a bestseller. But the story of humanity wasn't just about strength. It was about the cost of that strength. The physiological toll of reality anchoring was high. Humans who spent too long on the gates developed void sickness. Their connection to the material plane became loose. They would phase out of existence for seconds at a time. They would hear the songs of the scourge in their sleep. The Alliance built sanitariums for them on paradise worlds, places of intense sensory input, bright colors, loud music, strong flavors, to help anchor them back to the world of the living. These veterans were treated with a reverence reserved for saints. To see a fading human walking through a garden, their bodies shimmering like a mirage, was a reminder of the thin ice upon which the galaxy danced. And yet they never stopped volunteering. The waiting lists for the Anchor Academy were always full. It became a cultural imperative. To be human was to stand between the light and the dark. It was the answer to the Fermi paradox. Why was the galaxy so quiet? Because the humans were keeping the noise out. In the final, closing movements of this galactic symphony, we return to the Silent Forge. The original ship had long since been retired, encased in a museum superstructure orbiting Earth. But its spirit lived on in the Omega Forge, a structure the size of a moon, built directly over the supermassive black hole at the center of the galaxy. The Alliance had discovered that the scourge wasn't just coming from the edges, they were trying to tunnel through the core. The black hole was the ultimate gate, and so humanity built the ultimate plug. The Omega Forge was staffed by 1,000,000 souls. It was a city of steel and will, suspended over the event horizon. The gravity was crushing, mitigated only by the most advanced technology the Alliance possessed. Time moved differently there. An hour on the Forge was a day in the real world. The commander of the Forge was a woman named Alara, a direct descendant of Vance. She stood on the observation deck, looking down into the swirling accretion disk, the eye of the beast. The sensors showed the scourge pressing against the singularity, trying to invert the gravity, to turn the black hole into a white hole that would spew darkness into the galaxy. Beside her stood the Vexian High Steward and the Luminoth Choir Master. "The pressure is increasing," the steward noted, reading the data streams that flowed directly into his neural cortex. "They are massing for a push. This will be the largest incursion in history." Alara nodded. She looked tired. All humans look tired these days. "Let them come," she said softly. "We've reinforced the struts. The reality welds are holding." "It will require total focus," the Luminoth sang, its crystal body humming with resonance. "The choir must sing the song of stability, the architects must hold the geometry, and the wardens." "The wardens will hold the door," Alara finished. She pressed the intercom. "All stations, this is Commander Alara. We have a code midnight. You know the drill. Brace for impact, and remember, nobody moves." The push came. It was a tsunami of anti-reality. The black hole seemed to shudder. The Omega Forge groaned, the metals screaming under the stress. Inside the station, gravity fluctuated. Lights flickered. People bled from their noses as the laws of physics bent around them. But they held. The Vexian logic engines rerouted power with picosecond precision. The Luminoth sang a counter-frequency that hardened the air itself. And the humans just stood there. They manned the clamps. They poured their willpower into the anchors. They visualized the wall and they made it real. For 3 days, the galaxy held its breath. The stars dimmed as the Omega Forge drew power from the entire galactic grid. It was a tug-of-war for the soul of existence. And then the pressure broke. The scourge, exhausted, fell back into the abyss. The singularity stabilized. On the bridge, Alara collapsed into her chair. Silence returned, the heavy industrial silence of the forge. "We are stable," the steward whispered, awe in his voice. "We are secure." Alara closed her eyes. She reached out and touched the console, feeling the vibration of the great machine. "Good work," she murmured. "Same time next week." The Vexian chuckled, a dry, rattling sound. "I suppose so, Commander." The camera pans out from the galactic core, spinning faster and faster. It shows the spiral arms, the billions of stars, the trillions of lives. It shows the trade routes, the neon cities, the quiet farming worlds. It shows a galaxy teeming with life, diverse, chaotic, beautiful. And at every key point, at every door, at every dark corner, there is a gray block, a silent ship, a human standing watch. The narration returns for one final thought, spoken in the voice of Captain Vance, echoing across the eons. "They call us heroes, they call us guardians, but we're just stubborn. We found a place we liked. We found friends we liked. And we decided that no one was going to take that away from us. The universe is cold, and it's dark, and it's full of teeth. But as long as one of us is standing, the fire stays lit. We are the humans, and we are not moving." Fade to black. The end.